This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
I'd like to recognize the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
October 7th, Hamas carried out the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. They deliberately targeted innocent mothers, babies, grandparents, partygoers, peace activists, and countless others who had no connection whatsoever, even to military life. These were innocent civilians living their lives until they suddenly came to an end. The attacks unleashed a carnage that is almost unprecedented in human history. In fact, what was special about these attacks is the delight and the triumphal pride and exhibitionism with which Hamas surely carried them out. All of that reminds us that Hamas is not a militant organization. It is not a government. It is not an activist group. Hamas is a sadistic, criminal, terrorist death cult, and it must be defeated. Indeed, Israel does have the right to defend itself in accordance with international law, and it has the right to respond, just as Canadians would respond if an attack of this type were carried out against our people or on our soil. There will be and there can be no negotiating with Hamas. Hamas can only be destroyed, just like President Obama destroyed and assassinated Osama bin Laden. There was no negotiating with bin Laden, and there can be no negotiating with Hamas. And this attack was also an attack on Canadians. If I could quote my deputy leader, in the carnage, 5 Canadians were murdered, and they're not just numbers. Alexander Luke from Montreal, Ben Mizrachiov of Vancouver, both murdered when Hamas opened fire on a music festival. Shir Gregory was also killed. Adi Vital Kaplun of Ottawa was murdered in her kibbutz, and Ned Epstein was murdered as he attempted to defend his girlfriend against a grenade. They are now in our memories forever, and may their memories be a blessing. Canadian citizens missing are believed to be held hostage among the 199 by Hamas who hold their people, their own people, under siege in their gruesome grip, serving as a proxy for the regime in Iran, imposing maximum terror on everyone in their path of destruction. Among the missing believed to be held, Vivian Silver, Judith Weinstein, Tiferet Lapidot, daughter of Canadian citizens. Their fate is unknown, and Canada can and must do more to achieve their liberation, and we pray for their fate and their safe return, end quote. Meanwhile, 1 million Gazans are reportedly displaced. Many more are suffering and have lost their lives. Let it be said that the suffering of the Palestinian people is a tragedy. Every innocent human life, Palestinian or Israeli, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or otherwise, is of equal precious value. All of us must do everything in our power to preserve this precious life and minimize the suffering of innocent civilians. Let us be clear, though, this is not incidental to Hamas's actions. It was the purpose of Hamas's actions. Hamas not only seeks the maximum suffering of the Israeli people, it seeks the maximum suffering of Palestinians as well. Hamas has controlled Gaza ever since Israel departed from the Gaza Strip roughly a decade and a half ago. And it has worked diligently to preserve Palestinian suffering and prevent any opportunity for an easing of tensions or a future of peace. And we know why Hamas felt the need to act with such drastic cruelty at this time. Hamas, of course, is guided by its terror sponsor, the dictatorship in Tehran, which had been growing in its concern for Israel's signature of the Abraham Accords with the UAE, with Bahrain, an agreement with Sudan, and even the possibility of normalization with Saudi Arabia. This kind of peace between Muslims and Jews, between Israelis and Arabs, would be a nightmare for both Hamas and for Iran, for the dictatorship in Iran, who seek to perpetuate the conflict and the divisions as a source of power. They need to perpetuate the hatred in order to justify their dictatorships. And that's why they felt the need to interrupt any path towards peace. We all believe in a peaceful future that includes an independent Palestinian state, a two-state solution. And we believe that Israelis and Palestinians and other Arab countries need to discuss that peace. And we understand that stability and security for the Israeli people is necessary for that to happen. There are concrete actions that Canada can take towards these goals. And I will list some of them, though they are not exhaustive, and I expect that my members will be raising more of them later tonight in the Take Note debate. First, Canada must criminalize the IRGC, the terrorist arm of the Iranian government. There is no doubt that these attacks carried out on October 7th had a degree of sophistication and coordination to them that would not have been possible without aid from an outside government actor. And that actor, of course, was the dictatorship in Tehran. That same regime uses the IRGC as one of the most sophisticated and far-reaching terrorist groups in the world. It coordinates between Tehran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. It is unthinkable that the IRGC can operate legally in Canada. It can raise funds. It can prepare logistics. It can recruit new followers. Some of the people attached to the highest levels of the IRGC live in Canada today. Their very presence terrorizing peaceful Canadians of Iranian descent who desperately want to kick these terrorists out of our country. And they are right. The terrorists must be kicked out, and this organization must be a criminal entity in Canada. Second, we call for Hamas to immediately release all hostages. Third, we want a complete review of all aid programs to make sure that not one penny goes to terrorism. Fourth, we need to protect places of worship of all different backgrounds. We know that synagogues, potentially mosques, and other places of worship, we already know that these places have been targeted in the past in Canada. Prior to this recent incident, we know that Muslims have been the victims of hateful and murderous attacks by monsters here on our own soil. We know that synagogues are now facing attacks by anti-Semites. We know that churches have in the past been burnt down. All of this to say that we need to protect all of our places of worship. We need to de-bureaucratize and simplify the federal programs that provide security infrastructure at places of worship so that every single Canadian, regardless of their belief, can feel safe when they go to worship with their fellow congregants. As I said at the outset, and as I say again, the lives of innocent Palestinians and Israelis are of equal value. And to that end, we believe that it is urgently important to minimize the suffering and protect the lives of Palestinians who had no part in these attacks. And that includes by supporting safe zones for civilians in Gaza, by backing a humanitarian corridor for food, water, and medical supplies. It means that we should support the evacuation of foreign nationals through Egypt. And it means that we must do a comprehensive review of all of the aid we are sending to Gaza to make sure that it actually reaches the Palestinian people and not the terrorist thugs in Hamas. Mr. Speaker, years ago when a terrorist attack happened in the United States of America, one commentator said that, almost trying to absolve the attack, said that we needed to look at the root causes of terrorism. Well, the root cause of terrorism is the terrorist, which I said at the time to the great horror of my critics. Some of them said that the statement was too simplistic to be true. Others said that it was that the statement was so obvious that it needn't be said at all. But in reality, it is neither. It is both simple and true, and it is perfectly the summary of the liberal democratic worldview. Our view is that each individual is responsible for their own actions. The root cause of terrorism, therefore, is not Islam or Christianity or Judaism or any religion. It is the individuals who carry out the terrorism. And this is important because it means that when we see vile actions carried out by people purporting to act on behalf of a religion, we do not blame all of their supposed co-religionists. Right. We do not blame Muslims for the actions of Hamas. We do not target our fellow Canadians because of something that has happened on the other side of the world. Here in Canada, we judge people on their own merits, their own deeds, and their own words. That is why the great Canadian Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier said when he was asked what is our nationality, he did not list an ethnicity or a religion or any other superficial demarcation. Back then, we were already mixed up. We had, obviously, Indigenous people, Scots, Irish, and many people from all around the world in our country. And therefore, we could not define ourselves on any of those lines. So he said, Canada is free, and freedom is its nationality. And so it is today. And so let us then set out to protect the freedom of all Canadians and to stand for the values of freedom all around the world. Let us support our Jewish and Muslim friends here in this country as they watch with horror and with sadness at what is happening to loved ones on the other side of the world. They too are Canadians. They are our people. We must stand with them now and always because, after all, we are Canadians. Thank you.
Today I rise to speak about the conflict in Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank. Over a week ago, Canadians awoke to horrifying images coming out of Israel after the terrorist organization Hamas launched an attack of unspeakable brutality. J'aimerais faire le point sur les mesures que prend.
I want to provide an update on the measures our government is taking to help and protect Canadians affected. I also want to share the real concerns that the situation is causing amongst our people in this country, among Jewish and Muslim Canadians, Canadians of Arabic origins, and all Canadians.
Parmi les milliers de...
Mr. Speaker, among the thousands of people affected by this violence, 5 Canadians were murdered by Hamas terrorists. 3 Canadians are reported missing and may be hostages. I know that all parliamentarians and Canadians' thoughts are with them and their loved ones. Canada asks Hamas to free all the hostages immediately.
Canadian Armed Forces flights have departed Tel Aviv so far with approximately 1,300 passengers on board. In addition, the first bus has departed the West Bank and brought Canadians to safety in Jordan. Le ministre des Affaires mondiales et
the Minister of Global Affairs and our ambassadors in the region are working tirelessly in order to help them. They're working tirelessly to come into contact with the Canadians that are affected and to help them.
Et nos partenaires pour aider les gens.
We're working with our partners to help Gaza leave the Gaza Strip and Israel the safest way possible, as well as the fastest way possible.
Deeply concerned by the dire and worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Canada is calling for unimpeded humanitarian access and a humanitarian corridor so that essential aid like food, fuel, and water can be delivered to civilians in Gaza. It is imperative that this happen. Depuis la fin de semaine dernière,
Since last weekend, I have communicated with leaders in the region, such as the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, King Abdullah of Jordan, the President of the United Arab Emirates, and the President of Egypt, and the Emir of Qatar. I discussed freeing Canadian hostages and all hostages, of providing humanitarian assistance, and providing assistance to Canadians so that they are brought to safety, as well as for maintaining peace and stability in the region. Minister Joly was on the ground. She's directing our diplomatic efforts, working day and night, meeting Israelis, Palestinians, and other partners in the region.
Is working tirelessly to ensure that CAF evacuation flights are getting as many Canadians out of the region as possible. And Minister Hussein is leading conversations with his international counterparts with
I apologize to interrupt the Right Honourable Prime Minister, but of course to remember that we are to refer to members by their titles, either titles as the positions that they hold or as members of Parliament, but not by their names.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of National Defence is working tirelessly to ensure that CAF evacuation flights are getting as many Canadians out of the region as possible, and the Minister of International Development is leading conversations with his international counterparts and with aid organizations, making sure essential support is getting to affected people. Canada has committed an initial $10 million in humanitarian assistance to provide essentials like food, water, emergency medical aid, and protection assistance to those affected by the crisis in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. And I want to be clear, none of this aid is going to Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization that slaughtered and brutalized innocent people. Hamas continues to commit unspeakable atrocities and are trying to instigate further acts of violence against Jewish people. Let me be clear about Hamas. They are not freedom fighters. They are not a resistance. They are terrorists. Terrorism is always indefensible, and nothing can justify Hamas's acts of terror and the killing, maiming, and abduction of civilians. But let me also be extremely clear that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people nor their legitimate aspirations. They do not speak for Muslim or Arab communities. They do not represent the better future that Palestinians and their children deserve. The only thing they stand for is more suffering for Israeli and Palestinian civilians. Canada fully supports Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. And in Gaza, as elsewhere, international law, including humanitarian law, must be upheld by all. Even wars have rules. Canada is always steadfast in our commitment to the rule of law. The rule of law is what we stand up for here in Parliament, what we advocate through diplomacy, and what we will always fight for, no matter the circumstance. Ici, au pays, les émotions.
Here in our country, emotions are running extremely high. It can be explained in part by the fact that many of these stories are Canadian stories. That's due to our diversity. Many of us know someone who's been affected, or we know someone who knows someone. I met members of the Jewish community grieving in the aftermath of this tragedy. I was told about young people who were shot down during a music festival. The murder and kidnapping of older people, of women, of children. Members of the Jewish community talked to us about friends who died too soon and their fears of seeing their loved ones taken hostage.
From the Muslim and Palestinian community. They told me about how families in Gaza are spreading themselves between homes to prevent the possibility that they could all be lost in a single moment. That from Canada, they worry desperately about their loved ones, but because electricity has been cut off, they have to rely on sporadic 15-second phone calls to know who is safe. Their worries aren't just for people overseas. The worries are about people here at home, too. Across our country, both Jewish parents and Muslim parents wonder whether their kids are safe at school. Families are worried about going to places of worship. Jewish people are wondering if they shouldn't wear their Star of David or kippah in public. Muslim and Arab people are worried about being thought of as terrorists once again. The list of worries is endless, and the fear is real. There are rising instances of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We saw the reports of hate crimes against a Muslim woman in Montreal and at a Hebrew school in Toronto. And all of our hearts break at the horrifying news that came out of Illinois yesterday. There are so many people in Canada who are afraid of the escalating tension here at home, who are scared as they watch horrible things happen to people in places that they love in the Middle East, who for years have lived somewhere between fear and hope. Fear that escalation will tear them further apart, and hope that one day peace could finally take root. Il ne faut jamais oublier que la diversité.
Never forget that diversity is our strength. Canada welcomes people from all horizons who have a plethora of identities. We are a country of neighbors, of colleagues, of friends, of family. We represent that diversity and we live it every day. Now, more than ever, we have to unite. We have to avoid letting worries and suspicion separate us.
It's a short path from mistrusting your neighbor to entrenching division. A peaceful society does not happen by accident and won't continue without effort. We live in a country that upholds the freedom of expression, including religious and cultural expression, and every Canadian should feel safe doing so. This is the right and freedom every Canadian has under our charter. Canadian liberty is not about taking away the freedoms of others, but living in a way that expands and strengthens freedom for everyone. Monsieur le Président, comme Canadiens,
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians, we've proven that it's possible to build and define a country based on, anchored in, common values.
ne se définit
Canada is not defined by one single identity, whether it be historical or ethnic or religious or anything else, but through shared values.
once again at a moment where our shared values are being put to the test. Unrest is being felt in ways big and small. Canadians are deeply worried, no matter their background. This is why we must hold on to our commitment to the idea of this country. We've been tested before. about who we are and what we are. But the core values of Canada have always been there to guide us, to make us stronger, to bring us together when forces or events try to divide us. Our diversity is our strength. We can never forget this. This is a time to reach out, to support one another. Ask a friend, a family member, or a colleague how they're doing. Reach out to members of a different faith. Offer to listen. Offer to help where you can. People are not all right. So let's make sure they're not alone. As I've said before, the Canadian idea of liberty is an inclusive freedom, expansive freedom. Let's remember who we are as Canadians and what we stand for here and around the world. Respect for everyone's rights and freedoms and the rule of law. Respect for different languages, ethnicities, and religions. Respect for human life. And respect for each other.